Right, and we're back. This is sort of part 2 of the carburetor rebuild video, if you were looking for that. But it also can stand on its own. Carburetors don't necessarily have to be rebuilt to be adjusted. That's the reason why I'm making 2 videos here. Just finished rebuilding my Motorcraft, aka Holly, 1-barrel carburetor for my 200 cubic inch V6 or straight 6. I'm sorry, out of my 1979 Ford Fairmont. So one of the important next step is to get it set up so that it's running properly. Carburetors are mechanical devices. It's not like fuel injection. It doesn't have all the electronic sensors and things to keep track of everything. It does it all mechanically, which personally I think is kind of cool. But it does require a certain amount of setup to handle the varying conditions that your vehicle will run into. We're going to cover that here in this video. We're going to start with a choke adjustment and work our way from there. Right, well, a little bit in the rebuild video, we talked about how to adjust the choke in a preliminary adjustment. A choke is something you adjust if, like, say you're having a hard cold start in the morning or a start stall or something like that. And sometimes even if it stays closed and it doesn't open properly, it'll be hard, hot restarts. The choke is, come on up here. The choke is this little metal plate on the top of the carburetor. And what it's here to do is regulate the amount of air going down into the carburetor. When it's colder, you want more fuel and less air to get into the carburetor. So this metal plate is here to sort of block that off. Now, the adjustment of this is critical to the operation of the carburetor and usually the first thing that I adjust. And you do it, there's 3 screws on the outside of this choke assembly over here that you can loosen. And you can sort of dial it in either tighter or looser, depending upon which way you turn it. See how the way I turn this is directly proportional to what you're seeing there? Well, I like to set them up, and you have to do this on a stone cold engine. You can't do this if the engine is warm at all. I like to do this where there's just barely enough movement there. So there's just a slight amount of movement. And I can check it by hitting the gas, so to speak, and seeing if it goes up to my fast idle, which it is. That's when the choke is fully open, say normal operating temperature, normal operating range. This is where it would be. So when I first step on the gas first thing in the morning, I hit the gas, it should snap closed, and it should have about that much tension. When I say that much, I mean very light pressure is going to move it. So if you have it too tight, it's going to stay closed for too long and the mixture won't be correct. So you want to be mindful of that. So just have it to where there's just a little bit of tension, and then you can tighten it down. In fact, I'm only going to tighten down one of these right now so I can come back later. Now, also you want to check for continuity. Some chokes are electric chokes, and earlier in the other video I showed how to check if your choke has continuity going through it, and it should, and if it doesn't, it should be replaced, because if not, it'll never quite heat up to temperature like it should. When the engine is totally warm, it should be just straight up and down like that, so that all the air can pass into the engine. But when it's cold, first start it, it should snap shut like that. If you don't get it right, you gotta let it cool down and come back and try again. So that's adjustment number 1. All right, now I'm going to start it up for the first time since I've rebuilt the carburetor. It's gonna take longer no matter what. Why? Because the fuel bowl is completely empty, so it's going to have to pump fuel up into the carburetor before it's going to operate. So it will take longer. I'll tell you what, I will ground out the coil and crank the engine. That'll fill up the fuel bowl, and then we will try to start it up then. Lead and ground it. There you go. That will ground that out nicely. So this way I can crank the engine. It's not going to fire off the ignition, and it'll fill up the fuel bowl for me. Thinking that should have filled it up. Now I will pump the gas a couple of times, and that's all you should have to do. You should be able to just hit the gas like a couple of times. The accelerator pump should squirt a little fuel into the engine, and you should be good. And just to make sure that that's able to do that, yep, I see a couple of squirts there. Okay, when you first start it, the choke should open ever so slightly to start with, so it shouldn't stay completely closed. So once it starts running, it should have opened just a little bit, so look for that. I've already tightened the screws down because I'm super confident I got it right. Fingers crossed.
Started right up. I'm gonna shut it off and then I'll come back.
Okay, we know it starts up and the choke works like it should. In fact, it's already started to heat up a little bit and already starting to open up a little bit. So I believe I nailed the choke adjustment, so I'm gonna walk away from that. The next adjustment that you're probably gonna have to do, well, you can do this while it's cold, is the fast idle screw. And that's actually on the back of the carburetor there. I'm gonna back it out so that the tailpipe is out the door so we don't asphyxiate ourselves in here, and complete the rest of my adjustments there. So the engine needs to stay running for that. So I'm gonna back it out and we'll get to that fast idle adjustment. Got to adjust the fast idle while it's cold. It's not even on that cam anymore, so I'm not adjusting anything. It's already off of that. So help keep things quiet while we work. Right, well, I think I'm gonna try to adjust the mixture screw, the idle mixture screw, and get that dialed in a little bit here. I have a vacuum gauge hooked up to intake vacuum so that I can measure the intake vacuum, and it's fairly simple. The idle mixture screw is right down in here, as you'll see. It's got the spring attached to it, and if you've got more than one barrel on a carburetor, you're gonna have more than one of these, one for each of the primaries on your carburetor. And what you wanna do is you wanna adjust the idle and the engine to run with the most intake vacuum you can possibly get. So you keep twisting the screw until you get good intake vacuum. But once you think you've got it, give the engine a rev and let it settle down and see where it comes in, because it'll change ever so slightly. Also note that it's going to be different on different days. Your elevation, your temperature, your humidity, all this stuff is going to come into play in how this works. So really you're getting an approximation, the best approximation you can get with this screw, and that's that. So I'm going to, as I said, try to adjust this once this warms up. I'm going to let it warm up now until my choke is fully open, and then I'm going to tweak that screw and see what I can get from it, see if I can get it adjusted correctly. I don't think that's intake vacuum. It's not. Find an intake vacuum source. So without that vacuum leak, you see how the idle changed? I used to have a vacuum leak there that I ended up plugging. Here's our gauge. Not really much movement. Getting a little worse there. I'm going to keep turning it in and leaning it out. Looks like it's getting a little better. Starting to waver a bit. So now is the part where I rev it. Doesn't like that. It's really happy right about there. And I'm getting what looks like 18 inches of vacuum, which is pretty good for this old engine.
Couple of things that I want to note here before we move on. First, the engine needs to be fully warmed and the choke needs to be all the way open, as you see here, to make this adjustment. Also, check your tune-up items, your ignition system, make sure your plugs, your wires, your cap, your rotor are all good, and also make sure your ignition timing is correct. You want to make sure that the engine itself is sound when you do these adjustments, so that they turn out to be accurate and effective.
Now normally, you have a base idle screw. And I don't know if I'm seeing one down in there or not. I'm gonna have to get a flashlight. If this is it, we'll find out. It is. So this opens the throttle and closes it a little bit based on when the throttle's closed. So I can back it off and the idle will come down. I can turn it in and the idle starts to come up. Now, you don't want the idle too high. If you have the idle too high, it'll bang going into gear and everything else, and you don't want that. So now that I've got my mixture adjusted correctly, I'm just gonna try to bring this in, and usually listed on tune-up specs somewhere underneath the hood of the car, you'll find out what RPM to set the idle at. Usually it's somewhere around 800. And then also they may ask you to put the car in gear and recheck it because the RPMs will change when you put it in gear. So I'm going to do that now and see what I get. I'd say that's pretty good. I might want to adjust it just a little bit more and bring it up just a hair, but that's about it, not a lot at all. Now I'm going to check it for vacuum leaks, but the other adjustments would be like, say this solenoid here for like the fast idle, like say for the air conditioning or something like that. This one is not functioning, so it's going to be useless to try and make this adjustment, but it's another screw adjustment up here. Basically, if you have a carburetor rebuild kit, it'll walk you through it. A service manual will walk you through it also. But I'm going to put this back together and run it down the road and see how it performs out on the road. So why don't you come with me and we'll check it out. Don't over tighten that either. Well, already it's running smoother and better. And part of it is during the process of the rebuild, I found another vacuum leak. So that was extremely helpful. But the idle is actually much better. And I can actually just let my foot off the brake and it will slowly creep forward. So I know I got the idle just about right. Now we'll see if the accelerator pump is working like it should, and also the power valve and everything else. But we're gonna do that on the way to the gas station because she's almost out. And we don't want to run it out of gas. Accelerator pump's working fine. So far, it's a 22nd quarter mile. But it goes good all the way up to the RPM range. Feels a lot more drivable. Let's see how it starts up now with a hot restart. I didn't even touch the gas. I just turned the key and The engine is running. There was no clunk when I put it into gear like before. We're on our way. Ooh. It's as much as I could possibly do. Pretty sure that was about a quarter mile. If it was 20 seconds. But there's no misses, no dead spots in the RPM range. Everything seems to be functioning well. The idle's a lot better. Not only did the carburetor rebuild help in the adjustments, but I also found a major vacuum leak. So whenever you're doing carburetor adjustments, look around for vacuum leaks first. Because if you have any vacuum leaks, it's going to upset the performance of everything else, and you're not going to be able to set the carburetor up properly. So it's real important to make sure you check for those. There'll be a link in the description to the video that I did about finding vacuum leaks. Make things easy for you. But now that she's fully warmed up, you can't even tell it's running. She's purring. First time starting the Ford, cold start since I rebuilt the carburetor. I should be able to hit the gas like about 3 different times and then just turn the key. It should start right up. I've got you focused in on the choke plate so you can see what happens there. I haven't touched it or done anything yet.
Bring it down. That's a little better. A little more normal. I think around 12 to 1400 is a good place for a fast idle. I'm gonna let it warm up, hit the gas, let it come off the fast idle and see how it runs then. For those of you thinking, I should have put an air filter in it, actually this air filter is not that old. But if you go through the trouble to rebuild your carburetor, it's not ideal to replace the air filter, and in that case, there's also the fresh air filter for the PCV that's in the back there. But given that my oil cap doesn't seal at all, I don't think it really matters. Okay, it looks like the choke is all the way open. I'm gonna just hit the throttle and see if it comes down to normal idle. That's a happy car right there. She's just purring along. I think she needs to go out for a run. What do you think? We should take her out for a drive. Right, well, we've done the cold start. Now let's do the hot start. I've just taken it for a nice drive, brought it in the shop. I just shut it off. Now I'm going to turn the key and see how it starts up. I shouldn't have to do anything. I should just be able to hit the key and it should start right up.
Right, well, carburetor adjustments. They're really specific to the carburetor you're working on, but the basics are what I showed you here. And the two main ones to watch out for are number one, the choke adjustment, and number two, the idle mixture screws. You want to make sure you get those dialed in correctly. Use a vacuum gauge. If you're wondering about how I've still got sort of a lopey idle a little bit, a while back I did a video about checking for timing chain slack, and I've got quite a bit in this engine. And what that'll do is that will make the cam and the crank not rotate as one, and it won't run as smooth. It's running about as smooth as it can now, I think. The ignition system is good. Now I know the carburetor is good. It's freshly rebuilt and adjusted. But it is running way better than it used to. And it wasn't really running bad before, but there's a marked difference in how the idle works and how it runs. So I'm very pleased with the result. Ended up being about $40 in the carburetor rebuild kit, plus a float. I bought that also. Start with checking for vacuum leaks. Adjust the choke first. Hook up a vacuum gauge when you do your other adjustments. Check if you've got a rebuild sheet that came with a carburetor rebuild kit. Say you're doing this after a rebuild, check that for all those little fine-tuning adjustments. Also on the underhood sticker, many times you'll find how to adjust many of those things. And lastly, the service manual, if you can dig one up. I know that carburetors are going to be on older vehicles, so you're going to have to play around a bit. Anyway, those are the basics of carburetor adjustment, and I hope they're helpful to you. If you have automotive questions, I would ask that you head over to EricTheCarGuy.com. There's a welcome video there to tell you about all the amazing features that we have to help you with automotive questions should you have them. If you wish to connect with me socially, I can be found on Google+, Facebook, and Twitter. I close each of my videos with be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and keep your carburetor adjusted. I'll see you next time.